I don't know if you've ever experienced anything embarrassing taking place at a meal table or at a meal time. I heard a story about a minister who invited over a couple in the church, a couple who were notoriously very difficult to get on with. And the young minister was trying to find a way to build bridges and to make relationships with this couple, knowing that they too were very critical of him and his family. So in the morning, he told his family that the couple were coming for dinner, and they discussed it over breakfast, and they all realized that this might be a very difficult thing and that they weren't easy to get on with. And so they said a prayer over breakfast, and Dad was just praying that God would give him the grace and the strength and the help and the patience and the fortitude and the courage, etc., for the evening meal. The evening meal came and the couple are seated around the table with the family. They hold hands and they bow for prayer. And as the custom, often the children were asked to pray for the meal. And so Mum asked one of the children, to pray for the meal. And the child was a bit reluctant and a bit embarrassed themselves. But reassuringly, the mum said, just pray, what Dad prayed this morning, over breakfast, as we normally do. And so as all heads were bowed and eyes were closed and hands were clenched together in prayer, the little boy said, God, we thank you for this food. And pray that you will give us the courage and the grace and the help, the strength and the peace we need to deal with this difficult couple who are here for dinner. Well, you can imagine the embarrassment that was felt at the table. And I understand that the minister wasn't able to open his eyes after the prayer for quite some time. There's a story that's quite embarrassing that's told in Matthew chapter 26 about a dinner that takes place at a man called Simon's house. And Simon was a Jewish leader, maybe on the Sanhedrin council. So a very important man indeed. And he invited Jesus and his disciples to dinner. It's like an exclusive VIP party. And so the cream of the creamer there, we have Simon, we've got the followers, like the inner circle of the disciples. And we've got Jesus himself, who is the king who's come to Jerusalem and the one who has been hailed as Messiah and a miracle worker. And he's managed to get him for dinner. And so they're having this beautiful meal in Simon's house. And halfway through the meal, it seems, this woman bursts into the house who's uninvited, who's not welcome, who's a woman and really shouldn't be there, who clearly is known to some people in the room because they're scornful of her. And the other stories about her in the Bible seem to suggest that she may have been a demon-possessed woman, or may have been a prostitute, or may have had a very coloured, checkered history. And she comes into the middle of the meal and disturbs the meal by making a beeline for Jesus. And she takes out from her cloak or from whatever she's carrying this very expensive jar of perfume. And she takes it and without words, she just begins to put it on Jesus' head. And then puts it on his face, begins to kind of kiss his face and his head. And then begins, according to some of the other story, to put ointment on his feet and anoint his whole body. And wipes the ointment with her tears and mixes that into his feet and dries it with her hair. I mean, it's quite an astonishing thing. And everyone is clearly embarrassed at the meal, especially Simon and especially the disciples. Who is this woman? Why is she here? Does she not realize who we are? Does she not realize who she is? The one without commotion in the story is Jesus. And Jesus says, why are you bothering this woman? Leave her alone, for she has done a beautiful thing for me. And Jesus looks at her tenderly, perhaps with a smile, perhaps with a loving embrace, but lifts her up in front of all of the high dignitaries, this low person, this outcast, this outsider, the least and the low that we talked about yesterday in our video. And he exalts her, he honors her, and says, don't you know that she's actually acting out the burial that I will receive just in a few days' time? She's anointing me as if I have already been killed and taken and been put to death. And days later, Jesus will be taken and killed and put to death and will be anointed by women who come to look for him on resurrection morning. And so she has prophetically, as a foretaste, done this beautiful thing to him. And Jesus honors her. It is an extravagant act of love. It's an extravagant act of sacrifice. It's an astonishing, extravagant act in a public forum that may have caused great embarrassment. But Jesus recognized that behind her history and beyond her history and beyond the stories of her past, here is someone who is exuberantly expressing her love and devotion in a way that Simon doesn't do, in a way that the disciples won't do, and in a way in which he recognizes is a beautiful thing. Today, as we go about our day, may God help us to love extravagantly. May God help us to love exuberantly. May God help us to give up a very expensive, precious thing that might be dear to us in order to minister to someone else in need. She has done a beautiful thing for me. May today we follow after the heart of Jesus Messiah, who himself is poured out as an extravagant offering for us. And may we, like this woman, a woman who's not even named in the story because of her history, may we also do beautiful things to people that we meet today.